Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving. It's your host Punam here with a very special guest, Gayathri Narayanan. During the first episode, Gayatri shared some practical benefits of mindfulness that she reaped in her personal journey. I'm sure you enjoyed listening to that episode and you are inspired to continue your mindfulness journey. If you did not get a chance to listen to that episode, I highly encourage you to listen to it. Today, we will specifically talk about mindful parenting and why it is important to include mindfulness while parenting in the fast-paced competitive world. Welcome back, Gayatri. Before I ask
Hello,
you more
Punam.
questions, welcome back. So before I ask you more questions, please introduce yourself and tell us more about your role as a mother.
Hi, Punam, and hello to all the listeners. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share. So my name is Gayathri Narayanan, and I have been teaching mindfulness and meditation mostly in the Bay Area, but also now a lot of my teaching is on Zoom online. I've been teaching since actively, I would say, since about 2015. And I got certified to become a mindfulness meditation teacher through the Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program that was taught by Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock, and that was a 2-year program. So I got certified, and then I'm also a certified parent educator through ECHO, and it's an organization based in Los Angeles. So as far as mindful parenting goes, this is something that I was introduced to when I first met the director of Echo Parenting. At the time, they were called Echo Parenting. Now they're just called Echo. And and I remember going and meeting her and asking her, what they do. And at the time, they were called they all on the website they were called the Center for Nonviolent Communication and Education. So when I went and met her and I asked her, I said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Oh, we teach nonviolent parenting." And it took me completely by surprise because I was like, "Well, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean nonviolent parenting? Like, do we have any other kinds of parenting other than nonviolent parenting?" It was a little surprising to me, the title of their program. And she started describing to me and explaining to me how it is that there's so much violence in the the prevailing models for parenting that that most people in the world practice, which is what we call the domination paradigm, and where the parent is sort of the authority, and the child is like you know considered to be like a partial person just because they're younger and tinier. They somehow take on the status of being like a partial person, and that somehow if you yell at them or scream at them or punish them or beat them, that it doesn't matter as much because they're little. And but she was explaining to me how deep some of these um, experiences, how it affects the child's psychology, how it affects the way they are in the world. And so then I was very intrigued by that. And then I signed up with them to become a parent educator, and I learned their curriculum, and then started teaching in the community. And I have two children of my own. My son is now 21 years old and in college, and my daughter is a senior in high school. She's 17. And lucky for me, I found this way of being as a parent when they were, I think, 4 and 7, or 3 and 7. And I just feel really lucky that I found it early, and that I was able to apply some of these tools and practices in my own journey as a mother. Yeah, so I don't know if that fully answered your question, but it has enriched our relationships in our household, this way of being as a parent. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful, Gayatri. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you are also teaching 6 weeks of mindful parenting classes yourself. So please let us know. I understand, like you were explaining, right? The non-violent communication is so important. And to me, honestly, even comparing your kids with others, criticizing them, and you talked a little bit touched about control, right? So that is
Hmm.
also a form of a violence in my mind, right? So we need to respect our kids and treat them as a human beings instead of, that hierarchical, authoritative parenting style. But I wanted to ask you, during these 6 weeks of your mindful classes, what do you teach and why do you think mindfulness is important for a parent?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Punam. So, like I said, initially when I was introduced to this way of being, it was called nonviolent parenting. And I somehow didn't like the ring of it because it just had it's a little bit jarring to say, oh, I'm teaching a class on nonviolent parenting. But what I realized when I was looking at the content and the curriculum and the skills and practices, a lot of it is rooted in mindfulness. It basically involves the parent being able to be present, being centered, being aware of what's happening in their own bodies and minds, and then relating to their children from a place of empathy and compassion. So there was so much crossover in terms of the tools that they were teaching and the mindfulness practices. So what I did was I kind of blended the eco curriculum for the parenting curriculum with the mindfulness skills that I was practicing, and I created my own sort of a 6 week program. And sometimes I do it as an 8 week program, and sometimes as a 6 week program. But each of the sessions are like a full hour and a half because it does take a little bit of time to unpack some of these concepts and to have enough time to practice the skills in the class. So the topics that I generally include in a 6 week course, for example, of course, an introduction to mindfulness, and every class I have a meditation. So the mindfulness pieces of it includes a mindfulness of breathing, a mindfulness of the body, and bringing awareness to the senses, bringing awareness to thoughts and feelings, self-compassion practices, loving kindness practices, and of course practices around gratitude and appreciation and so on. So every class I have some aspect of mindfulness that's included in the class. But in terms of the parenting piece of it, I shared information about brain and child development, learning to make observations and learning to identify feelings and needs for ourselves and for the child, right? So in the middle of an interaction with the child, you might see certain behaviors, outer behaviors, but what is actually going on beneath all of that, like being able to look beyond just the outer expressions of behavior to try to identify what the child is needing and feeling, and to learn how to communicate your empathy to your child, and then figure out how to develop solutions that might be wholesome, that might be beneficial for both the parent and the child. So these skills of what we call OFNEEDS is a tool that I share, OFNEEDS, and it's something that they developed out of the work of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who was a great pioneer in this practice of nonviolent communication. And he really emphasizes empathy and sort of a connected form of relationship. It's not just for parenting; it's for any kind of relationship, any kind of communication, and learning how to be present. Make clear observations, communicate the observations, communicate feelings and needs. So I introduce the off needs tool. Then, of course, there's one of the classes I spend on reflecting on our own childhoods, because a lot of our beliefs and habits around parenting we've inherited, through our own, through the ways in which we were parented. So to bring some clarity to that and some understanding to our own history, so that we don't repeat mistakes unconsciously, and that we can create a new way of being with our own children that might be different from the way we were parented. And then, of course, there's a class on learning how to repair rupture. Like, when things go wrong, how do you go back and heal the rupture with your child so that we don't kind of let that rupture develop into some kind of a toxic situation between the parent and the child, right? So learning how to regulate your emotions, learning how to identify anger, learning how to repair the rupture. These are all sort of healthy ways of cultivating a long-term connected relationship with your children. And of course, there are classes on learning how to set limits, because one of the common sort of misunderstandings about this way of parenting is people think, oh, it's a sort of a permissive way of parenting, that it's like, oh, anything goes, like you can let your child roam free and let them do whatever they want. That's not what this is about. It is about learning how to set limits, but to do it in a compassionate way, to do it in a way that actually makes sense, and in a way that you can do it collaboratively with the child, rather than sort of just enforcing rules and punishing children, and sort of taking a heavy-handed approach. Is like learning how to set limits in a way that is more respectful. So those are some of the topics that I cover in the 6-week parenting program.
Thank you, Gayatri, for explaining all the curriculum. And I must admit, your classes are wonderful. I joined myself, and I love the tool you mentioned about off needs. And the beauty of your classes were like there was other parents sharing their stories, and I felt so good, like I'm first and not alone. And there is
Yeah.
definitely a lot of things I can learn and unlearn. And you were talking about the parenting style I went through myself. I'm not born raised here. My parents did what they did as per the other country. Now my kids are born raised here, so I cannot maybe apply all the styles I learned from my parents. So it was amazing to learn from you and your calming voice. That mindfulness experience was incredible. So I highly recommend my audience to check out those classes and take benefit out of it. So, Gayatri, I wanted
Thank you,
to ask
Punam.
you, sure. So, what benefits, like you are saying, you got introduced to mindfulness and eco parenting very early when your kids were young. So, what benefits did you see in your parenting journey, imbibing all those things what you just mentioned?
Yeah, what I realized, as I started to practice, um, is, the first part of it is to recognize that, oh, you know what, just to notice where you resort to yelling or screaming or punishing, or to sort of bring that kind of compassionate awareness to your own habits, uh, in of your parenting, and by bringing that kind of gentle awareness and that sort of compassionate presence to your own struggles as a parent, that's what allows you to make the changes that are necessary. So for me, just that recognition, because initially when they said nonviolent parenting, I'm like, oh, I'm not a violent person. Of course, like I'm not like that. Like, I don't hit my children. Like, I'm not violent. So you immediately, you think of violence in the physical form, right? But then when I started to pay attention, to some of my interactions with my children, I was like, oh my, look at that. That was really violent. Like, where did those words come from? Like, and look at the tone of voice I'm using, and look how scared my child looks right now, when look how terrified she looks when I'm speaking this way. And, how powerless they feel, as a parent who's, sort of, uh, dictating or commanding or controlling. So I started to pay attention to some of these details of my own experience, and slowly started to practice, right? So learning how to pause, right, between stimulus and response, right? Like, so knowing to recognize when I'm dysregulated, when I'm emotionally dysregulated, when I'm tired, knowing when not to speak, right? All of those things really saved me hundreds and hundreds of times over the years with my children. And so I think, so that was really helpful for me and for my kids. And then in those times when things do go wrong, or there's been a rupture, or there's been yelling and screaming, and we're upset, I'm crying, they're crying, when that kind of thing happens, to know how to go back and say, hey, I'm really sorry, and I messed up, and I was really tired, I was angry, I was impatient, I'm sorry. So as a parent, to learn how to go back and heal, and to have a conversation, and to allow the children to express what they were experiencing in those moments, and to give them a voice and allow them. I mean, it's not a question of giving them a voice. They have a voice, right? It's not about me trying to give them a voice. They have one, but for me to be able to listen to them compassionately. And all of that actually helps develop their own emotional intelligence. So that's the beautiful part about this kind of parenting, is that not only are you modeling some of this, they are learning how to understand their own emotions, how to regulate their own emotions, how to communicate articulately about their own emotions. So for me, I would say my biggest, uh, I could say, uh, a source of pride for me when I look at my children is that they're both very emotionally intelligent children, and they're very compassionate beings. In their own relationships, I can see how they exhibit empathy, how they're able to um, cultivate their own relationships with their friends and their peers and their adults. So I think, and I don't know if this is the only reason, but I know for a fact that this way of parenting has contributed to that in their lives. So that is something. I think that was a great benefit in our family. But I think more than that, as a parent, I find this practice to be a deeply spiritual practice. Like, I feel it is such a great tool for our own awakening, for our own growth, because it heals our wounds from our childhood, and at the same time, it creates a certain kind of awareness, um, and growth within ourselves as we practice this way of being with our children. So there are so many benefits I can name, but this is just a few that comes up from the top of my head.
Thank you, Gayatri. I can relate with you. I feel my kids definitely made me a better human being, and practicing all those things also helped me to heal, and you give to others what you have. So when I am mindful, I am able to regulate my own emotions. My kids are watching me, and they're, you know, are the direct recipient of my compassion. So I can relate with you with mindful parenting. I feel, my kids are definitely emotionally intelligent, as you were saying. And as I said, I became better human because of them. So it was, win-win for us. They are teaching me, I am teaching them. They are learning from me, I'm learning from them. So as a family, we benefited a lot by imbibing those mindfulness principles in our family. So I wanted to ask you another question. When and how to practice mindfulness with a busy schedule? As a parent, like they're already juggling many balls, right? So any advice for that?
Yeah. You know, Punam, I think uh, I think something like this, especially when it comes to our children, right? We are creating the adults of the future, right? And if we think about it in that context and how important it is uh, to invest, uh, time and energy and invest ourselves into this journey, right? Because I feel it's almost like I think as a you have to you have to make it a priority and say that this is important, right? And once you decide that this is important, then the day will make time for you. you know, I think it's a commitment. It's really a commitment to be a compassionate parent, and to say that I am not going to I'm going to do my best not to hurt my children, right? And I want to create an adult of the future that is compassionate, that is confident, that is loving, that is emotionally articulate, that can be there for the world in ways that our world needs. We need those kind of leaders. We need compassionate leaders in the future. And so I think if we make that commitment, then we will find the time. And I'm not talking hours and hours, right? I'm talking about 15 to 20 minutes of time every day for your own practice, for your own meditation practice, for your own mindfulness practice. And then that spills over to the rest of your day. And it allows you to take those pauses when you need to pause. It allows you to reach out to your children in those moments when you feel that they need your your uh, your presence, your care, um, your understanding. Uh, so it gives you resource. It gives you sort of an inner resource, inner strength, when you invest that little bit of time for yourself in the, whether it's in the morning or evening or at some other time in the day, just a few moments to pause and to practice. Yeah.
You said it so beautifully. When you see the return on your investment, it's huge. So I understood that very early in my parenting journey, and I'm so glad I made that investment and a priority. And I would highly recommend my audience also to take time for your own self, for own well-being. So I wanted to ask you another question. Any, apps, we are living in the world of technology, any apps which can help our parents for doing this mindfulness practice every day?
Yeah. So I think the most popular ones that I know of are Calm is a really good app. Headspace, of course, is also a well-known app. There's another one called Insight Timer, which has a lot of different meditations. So you can, use any of these apps for your own daily practice if you prefer to have guided meditations. And of course, if you want to have a community to practice with, I have, a weekly, not weekly, like weekday meditations, Monday through Fridays, from 8 to 8:30. It's always nice to practice in community. Anyone is welcome to join. Um, so to create some kind of community or even, to meditate with the app, I think is a really is a good way to sustain a practice. Yeah, so the ones that come, yeah, Insight Timer, Calm, Headspace, those are some good ones for adults, I think. Um, and I think you also asked me about books, right? Did you ask me about parenting books as well?
Yeah, that will be wonderful to know.
Yeah, so there are few books I recommend, uh, and maybe there's a way uh, to put this list, at the end of the podcast or on the podcast site. But there's one called Mindful Parent, Happy Child, A Guide to Raising Joyful and Resilient Children. It's by Pilar Flacon. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And then there's some very beautiful books by Alfie Kohn, Unconditional Parenting, Moving from Rewards and Punishments to Love and Reason. That's another beautiful book. And of course, the nonviolent communication methods are laid out very beautifully in Marshall Rosenberg's book, which is just called Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. Daniel Siegel has a very wonderful book called Parenting from the Inside Out. Um, and John Gottman's book, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, The Heart of Parenting. That's another good book. So there's many books on this topic of parenting. But I think what's really interesting when we read all these books is how well the science supports these methods, that we're talking about. When you look at the way the brain develops and, when you look at child development, um, and, all the latest research in these areas, we realize that these methods of compassionate parenting really support healthy brain development. And so it's nice to read about it because it kind of affirms your practice in a way when you understand the science behind some of these methods.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gayatri, for sharing your great insights, recommending good books and apps, and sharing your personal experience. Feeling grateful to have you here and learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Poonam. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every Friday, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for listening.